Okay. Shabbat Shalom. Here we go. No rush. Watch this. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et hashava לעשות את השבה לדורותם בריתו ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם כי 6 ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם וביום השביעי שבת וינפש שבת ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם בורא פרי הגופן אמן לחיים. Okay, Torah Study blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Okay, so Torah portion this week is called Emor. We're dealing now with Leviticus chapter 23, verse 1. Emor. And Emor is famous for telling us the holidays that come from the Torah. And actually hint at Hanukkah, which is really neat. That there's a hint that there's going to be Hanukkah, meaning a prediction that there's going to be Hanukkah. Because even if you're one of those JP documentary hypothesis people, whenever you date the writing of the Torah, it's before Hanukkah. So if there's a hint that there's going to be a Hanukkah, it's pretty interesting. So we have the holidays, but I want to focus today on the pilgrimage holidays, which are Pesach, first Sukkot, then Pesach, and then Shavuot. And there's a very distinct connection. We're in the middle of it now. In fact, yesterday was Lag BaOmer. And today is, starting last night, was Lad BaOmer, meaning the 34th day of the Omer. Lamed Daled, which is not interesting. Lag is 33. So, the Omer, which we'll look at, is a mitzvah that is one of the 613 mitzvahs in this week's Torah portion, where we're commanded to count 50 days from the second night of Passover until Shavuot. So there's this connection between Pesach and Shavuot. Now there's no connection here to Sukkot. Sukkot is with Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. You have Rosh Hashanah on the first day of Tishrei, and 10 days later you have Yom Kippur, and 5 days after that you have Sukkot. But it's a little bizarre because what does Sukkot have to do with Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur? Sukkot should actually be attached to Pesach and Shavuot. Because if you think about the narrative, because they leave Egypt, and then they're protected in booths, and then they go to Mount Sinai and get the Torah. And that's those 3 holidays. But no, Sukkot is taken away from that and thrown over with Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur for a variety of different reasons. One of them being that you also have harvest that time of year, and we need a festival over by the harvest. Nobody really knows what Sukkot is anyway. Let's just throw it over there. That's reform. That's reform. How many of you have a sukkah? Nobody. 2. Okay. So that's what happened to Sukkot. You should build a sukkah. Okay. Anyway. Let's forget about Sukkot for a moment and concentrate on the connection between Passover and Shavuot. Now, it's exceedingly clear that there is a connection because we're commanded, as we'll see in a moment in this week's Torah portion, that you're supposed to count the 50 days, which we call counting the Omer, from the second night of Pesach until Shavuot. Now, a good question is, so if you have a Haggadah that is not meant for Israel, because in Israel you don't have second day Yom Tov, but if you have a Haggadah for the diaspora where you're going to have 2 Seders. So the first Seder, when you get to the end, it'll say count the Omer. And some people will get to that page and they'll count the Omer on the first day, the first Seder. But if you look closely, usually in small print, in parentheses, it says only for night 2. Because we don't count the Omer on the first night. We count the Omer beginning on the second night. And if you live in the diaspora, then you're having a Seder that night. And so as part of the second Seder liturgy is the blessing to count the first night of the Omer. So my question is why? Why not start counting the Omer from the first night of Pesach? Why do we start counting the Omer from the second night of Pesach? Now, here's a hint. We need it to match up to the exact day when they get the Torah. Right? So if you're going to count 50 days, and then you get the Torah, and now that's 51, or sorry, that's 49. Yeah, 51. No problem. Let's just, no, it'd be 49. No problem. Let's just 49. No problem. Let's just move it to the second day. Now it'll turn out to be the 50th day. You see how that works? Okay. But there's a reason why you can do that. So let's take a look. Okay. Now, there's one other question. We call Shavuot has a nickname. And when you're reading the prayers and you do what's called the Ya'aleh v'Yavo, the extra prayers that you insert into the Amidah or the Tefillah during the holiday, there's a nickname for the prayer, and it's Zman Matan Toratenu. Zman, the time of, Matan, the giving, Toratenu, our Torah, right, or the Torah. That's the nickname of Shavuot. But here's the point. Where in the Torah does it say that on Shavuot we got the Torah? The answer is nowhere. Nowhere. So how do we know that Shavuot isn't just a harvest holiday like it says in the Torah? We're waving Omer. Omer are sheaves. That's what you do every night. And then you would bring your sheaf, which the Torah says, Asher Hikrivu, that you come and offer on, your agricultural offerings that you burn and go up to God. Okay, so it's an agricultural holiday, but nowhere does it say that it has anything to do that day, Shavuot, with the giving of the Torah. And so you've been eating cheesecake for nothing all these years. No, all right. So All right, so let's take a look. And I think this sounds so far not that great, because who cares about agriculture, but you're going to see that something incredible just happened. Okay, so let's begin. Judy, would you mind with the mic? We're now looking at Leviticus 23, verse 1. So I just want to point out that we're in triennial cycle 2. So we're in the middle of the Torah portion. And this is where the Torah now is going to list what all the holidays are. So we're going to go through a few of the lists. But I only today want to focus on the counting of the Omer and Shavuot, which, by the way, it's ironic because we are counting the Omer now, and this is the Torah portion. So it actually fits. Right? Sometimes it doesn't fit. Like, we get into the fall and we're talking about the Exodus from Egypt when we read the beginning of Exodus, and we're nowhere near the holiday of Passover. But here we're in the period that we're reading about. So it's a little more interesting. Okay.
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, these are my fixed times, the fixed times of the Lord, which you shall proclaim as sacred occasions. On 6 days work may be done, but on the 7th day there shall be a Sabbath of complete rest, a sacred occasion. You shall do no work, it shall be a Sabbath of the Lord throughout your settlements. These are the set times of the Lord, the sacred occasions, which you shall celebrate each at its appointed time. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at twilight, there shall be a Passover offering to the Lord. And on the 15th day of that month, the Lord's feast of unleavened bread. You shall eat unleavened bread for 7 days. The first day shall be for you a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations. 7 days you shall make offerings by fire to the Lord. The 7th day shall be a sacred occasion. You shall not work at your occupations."
Right, so do y'all understand that when the Torah says it's a sacred day, what that means is that that holiday has the same restrictions as Shabbat, and with a few minor exceptions. But the first day of Sukkot and the last day of Sukkot, the first day of Pesach and the last day of Pesach, Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, they all have the same restrictions as Shabbat. Meaning you can't use electricity. All the work that you're not allowed to do on Shabbat, you can't do on these days either. And then Yom Kippur has some added ones, but that's what that means.
It's a Shabbaton, not a Shabbat.
On Yom Kippur, right?
No, but I mean on the first and last day of the festival holidays, that's a Shabbaton as opposed to a Shabbat.
Well, Shabbat, Shabbaton.
Because the term Shabbat, Shabbaton is for emphasis, superlative.
Yeah, but it usually only refers to Yom Kippur. Shabbat, Shabbaton is written in reference to Yom Kippur.
Something else, okay, whatever.
If you can find it somewhere else, let me see it. But I don't see it here. But maybe. I've never heard that, though. Okay, let's keep going. I could be wrong. We'll have to look it up. Okay, would you mind, Ken, continuing?
Okay,
Verse 9, yeah.
9. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land which I am giving to you, and you reap its harvest, you shall bring the first sheaf of your harvest to the priest. He shall wave the sheaf before the Lord for acceptance on your behalf, and the priest shall wave it on the day after the Sabbath. On the day that you wave the sheaf, you shall offer it as a burnt offering to the Lord, a lamb of the first year without blemish. The meal offering with it shall be 2/10 of a measure of choice flour with oil mixed in, an offering by fire of pleasing odor to the Lord, and the libation with it shall be of wine, 1/4 of a hin. Until that very day, until you have brought the offering of your God, you shall eat no bread or parched grain or fresh ears. It is a law for all time throughout the ages in all your settlements. And from the day on which you bring the sheaf of wave offering, the day after the Sabbath, you shall count off 7 weeks. They must be complete. You must count until the day after the 7th week, 50 days. Then you shall bring an offering of new grain to the Lord. You shall bring from your settlements 2 loaves of bread as a wave offering. Each shall be made of 2/10 of a measure of choice flour, baked after leavening, as first fruits to the Lord.
Okay, so I just want to go back to verse 15. Verse 15, you shall count for your. So verse 15 is the mitzvah, the verse that brings the mitzvah, one of the 613 mitzvah, to count the Omer. You shall count for yourselves. So then it says, mimacharat ha-Shabbat. Now, do you know the word in Hebrew, machar? Not macher. Machar means tomorrow. Macharat, so if mimacharat means from the morrow, what is mimacharat ha-Shabbat? The day after the Shabbat. Okay. And then it says, from that day you bring the Omer and you wave it, and then you're going to have 7 weeks. So how do we know that from that day and after is 49 days? Because 7 weeks. Right? If you can do that kind of calculation in your mind, it comes out to 7 weeks comes out to 49. But Macharat Shabbat. Now this was a debate. Have you ever heard of the Karaites? The Karaites, similar to the Sadducees, were a group of people who didn't believe in the Talmud. They only believed in the Torah. And so they had a lot of weird, and for a while they were a major factor. I mean, today they lost. The rabbinic way of Judaism won out, and the Karaites and the Sadducees, you know, I mean, there's a few Karaites, I think, in Chicago, and there's a few in, I don't know, some little village in Israel somewhere, but they lost. Nobody goes by them. But they believe, yeah. The Masoretes? Not entirely, no. I don't think so. Because some of them were the same people who wrote the Midrash. So they couldn't entirely be Karaitic. Well, it's not a matter of disparaging them, it's just... It might be too close to the... It's not, it's not a matter of It's not a matter of disparaging. Last night I was watching the Panthers game. They lost. I mean, it's not disparaging to say that they lost. Judaism doesn't go according to Karaitic tradition anymore. The rabbinic rabbis won out, which is what was my point. However, what I'm saying is this. This word, Macharat Shabbat, the Karaites believed it to mean the Sabbath. Because they didn't go according to the Talmud, and the rabbis didn't believe that it means Shabbat. So if you look at Rashi, he's quoting the Talmud here on the first source of the sheet. What it says here is, from the morrow after the day of rest, Shabbat here does not refer to the Sabbath according to the rabbis. When it says Macharat Shabbat, it means from the morrow after the first day of the Passover festival, which is why we start counting the Omer on the second night and not the first night. Now that's rabbinic. The Karaitic line had a different tradition. There were also another type of Jews called the Baitusim, and they also went according to that. I'm not telling you who's right or wrong. I'm just telling you that the Karaites said that it means from that Shabbat closest to Passover, and the rabbi said no, it doesn't. It means the Shabbat. The word Shabbat here refers to the day of rest, which is the 15th of Nisan, Pesach, and so from the morrow of that means from night 2 of Passover, which is why to this day the overwhelming majority of Jews count the Omer beginning the second Seder, as opposed to on the Shabbat closest to Passover. That's a lot of information. Does that make sense? So what happens is this: on the 14th, the 15th starts at night. At night, you're commanded to eat your Passover meal, which is the sacrifice. But if you wait till the 15th at night, till you sit down to your Seder to sacrifice your meal, it's too late. You're not allowed to do sacrifices at night. So the sacrifice had to be done during the day on the 14th. So when the sun goes down on the 14th, that's the 15th, right? Because the day ends in Judaism. The day ends when the sun goes down. So it's 7 o'clock or whatever o'clock. As soon as the sun goes down, it's the 15th. But during that day, it's the 14th. So on the 14th, you're commanded to bring your sacrifice. And from the time you bring your sacrifice, even though the holiday doesn't start till at night, once you bring the sacrifice, you're no longer allowed to eat bread. So it's a little tricky. But there's no way they could have been ready for the Seder or for the Passover meal that they were having on the 15th if they didn't already offer their sacrifice on the 14th. Because once the sun goes down, you're not allowed to offer their sacrifice, and you wouldn't have a sacrifice to eat. So God said, no problem. You bring it on the 14th, and you'll have it ready for the 15th. Right. Correct. And then the second night is when the Omer starts. Why? Because there's this verse that says, don't do it on the first night. Don't start counting the Omer on night 1 of Pesach. Start counting Omer mimacharat HaShabbat on the second day. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I'm about to present a completely different idea, but it's a good thought. It's a good thought. So when I'm thinking about Omer, my main concern about Omer is what is the link that from Pesach to Shavuot? What are we counting to? So my question now about the Omer isn't so much about the in and outs of Pesach, it's what connects Pesach to Shavuot. That's what I'm concerned about. And that's what the rabbis were concerned about, and that's why they differed from the Karaites. Okay, so let's take a look. There's the Shulchan Aruch. You know what the Shulchan Aruch is? The Shulchan Aruch was Joseph Caro's law code in the 1500s that he wrote in Sfat. We still hold by it today. This is what Jewish law goes by. So he gives a little bit of information on what is the halacha. What do I mean by halacha? What is the Jewish law of on how to do the Omer? So again, would you mind reading the Shulchan Aruch from Orach Chaim?
On the second night after the evening prayer, we begin to count the Omer. And if someone forgot to count, that one may count from the beginning of the evening onwards. He may account all night. It is a mitzvah for each person to count for themselves. He needs to count standing and bless before. He should count the days and weeks. How? On the first day, he should say, today is day 1 of the Omer, until he arrives to 7 days, at which point he should say, they are 1 week of the Omer. And on the 8th day, he should say, today is 8 days, and they are 1 week and 1 day of the Omer. And also, when he arrives to the 14th day, he should say, today is 14 days. They are 2 weeks of the Omer. And in this way, he should count and onwards until the 49th day.
Okay, now, what's agriculturally, just from the Torah, what's the point of counting Omer? What are we doing? It's agricultural. Bringing sheaves as offerings. It's nothing more than agricultural offerings. When did agricultural offerings end completely? Well, in terms of Judaism, Jewish law. Oh, that's an interesting concept. When the temple was destroyed, right? 70 CE. Okay. Clear so far? Once the temple is destroyed, we haven't had any offerings since. Although there were two psychotic, hardcore, right-wing settler Jews who a few days ago brought a goat to the Temple Mount to try to sacrifice it. So they're now guests of the state. But they actually brought a goat to the Temple Mount hidden in a little bag, and they tried to get out there, and they got in a fight with security. And don't do that. You know, don't. It's a really little goat. It was a really little. Yeah. So Joseph Caro lives. You know, by the way, Chabad has a custom to study 3 chapters of Maimonides' Mishnah Torah a day. That's their custom. Now, I once asked a Chabad rabbi, long time ago, why do you do that? Why don't you study Shulchan Aruch? Everybody goes according to Shulchan Aruch. Hardly anyone holds according to live by Maimonides, although they agree most of the time, but sometimes they don't. But the law goes according to Shulchan Aruch. Why don't you study 3 chapters of Shulchan Aruch every day? So what's the fundamental difference between Maimonides' Mishnah Torah and Shulchan Aruch, Joseph Caro's law code? Joseph Caro only deals with mitzvahs that we still do today. Maimonides deals with everything, even the stuff that we did during the times of the Holy Temple, including all of the sacrifices. So if you want to look in Caro about how to do the sacrifices, you're not going to find it. If you want to look in Caro about how to do all the agricultural stuff that we can't do anymore in the Holy Temple, you're not going to find it. So why do they study Maimonides instead? Because when Mashiach comes, we're going to need to know that stuff. So I don't want to see any of you studying Caro day to day. I want you to... If you do, it's okay. So if Caro is talking about counting the Omer and telling us how to do it, and the only reason you do it is for an agricultural reason, what he's telling you is there's a new reason to do it. Because the Torah says you're just doing it for an agricultural reason. It doesn't say anything about Shavuot, it doesn't say anything about getting the Torah. All it does is tell you in the Torah to do it for the agricultural reasons. So I would have thought that Caro would say, we don't need this one. Because I don't cover that stuff that we used to do. But yet here he is saying, no, it's still a mitzvah. So he needs a new reason. With me so far? Okay. It's an interesting idea, right? Okay. Okay, so ever heard of the Chafetz Chaim? Chafetz Chaim, one of the things he was most well known for was his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. He actually wrote 3 of them. In the first 2 we said, I could do better. Chafetz Chaim, it's pretty good. One of them is called the Biur Chalacha. Biur means the explanation of. And if you look at this is his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. So look what he says. It is the opinion of the Rambam. Now look, why is that already interesting to us? Because what he's saying is, the Rambam, Maimonides, has a different view or at least, maybe doesn't even have a different view, but adds something, adds an idea. Because remember, Maimonides is the one who teaches us all the stuff we need to know when the Mashiach comes, and Caro says, don't worry about that. When the Mashiach comes, he'll tell us what to do. So, what do you, Caro said, listen, here's what's going to happen. The Mashiach's going to come. And the high priest is going to get in there, and he's going to say, look, I haven't been studying Rambam. I forget how to cut the trachea of the goat before it. So you know what you could do? You could say, hey, Mashiach, can you remind me? And there you go. Now you don't have to study Rambam. That was Karo's idea. All right. But it's fun to bring Rambam and compare. So look and that's what the Chafetz Chaim does here. So the Chafetz Chaim says, it's the opinion of the Rambam and others that it is the practice from the Torah, even today, to count as a memory of the Holy Temple where the Omer were offered. Which means to say that when we read, if you look back in verse 15, and it says, you shall count for yourselves from the morrow, from the day when you bring the Omer of the waving, 7 weeks they shall be complete. And so what that verse means is, even though you don't have sheaves anymore, even though sheaves don't still exist, that's not the commandment. The commandment isn't to wave in this verse. The commandment in this verse isn't to wave the sheaves. What's the command? What's the verb? What? Count. The verb is to count. And so the Rambam is arguing that that means, that word, and you shall count, means forever. Jews need to count forever these days. Which means that beyond the harvest festival, something else is going on. Because if it were just for the harvest, we could all say, we don't need to count the Omer anymore. For the same reason that we don't do all the mitzvahs that have to do only with sacrifices, we don't do them anymore. In fact, you're not allowed to do them anymore. That's why those guys with the goat got arrested. Of course, they're holier than thou, they know better, whatever. Good luck with their goat. But we don't do those things anymore that are just agricultural. So if Maimonides is telling us that the Torah from the outset meant you need to count these forever, what that means is that the Omer have a different meaning even beyond agriculture. So for us, counting, even though we don't have sacrifices in agriculture anymore, agricultural sacrifices, the counting still has meaning for us. Now, we don't know what that is. By the way, Maimonides, I didn't bring the whole thing here, but, actually, you know what? Maimonides does explain it a little more deeply in the Guide for the Perplexed. The Guide for the Perplexed is Maimonides. So normally what we look at is the Mishnah Torah in this class, or when I bring it. The Mishnah Torah is Maimonides' summary of the Talmud. But he also wrote a philosophical treatise, which is, I haven't spent a whole lot of time since rabbinic school looking at it. I had a professor, kind of a shame. I think he was recently diagnosed with Alzheimer's. There's not one professor in my rabbinic school from when I was there that's still there. They're all retired, except maybe one or two. And now that Cincinnati doesn't exist anymore, they're going to retire. But there was this one teacher, one of my very, very favorite teachers. His name was Dr. Kogan, and he was a student of. He went to the University of Toronto, and I think that's where he got his PhD. Also, he was a student of Emil Fackenheim. I don't know if any of you know Emil Fackenheim, but he was one of the great post-Holocaust philosophers. He came up with the idea. If you want to read really good Jewish philosophy that you can understand, there's a book called What is Judaism by Emil Fackenheim. And he was a Holocaust survivor, and he came up with the concept of the 614th commandment. Have you ever heard that? 614th commandment, according to Fackenheim, was, thou shalt not give posthumous victory to Hitler. Thou shalt not give posthumous victory to Hitler. That's the 614th commandment, according to Emil Fackenheim. But anyway, Dr. Kogan was a student of Fackenheim, and he knew the Guide for the Perplexed by heart, which is beyond belief. The guy was unreal. He was one of my very favorite teachers. But anyway, here's a little bit, in his honor, a little bit of the Guide for the Perplexed. Joe, would you mind reading where it says, with a few exceptions?
Got it. With a few exceptions, the reasons for all of them are stated in the law. The Feast of Weeks is the anniversary of the revelation on Mount Sinai. In order to raise the
Whoa. You see what just happened?
Yeah, that's...
Where does he get that? Look what he just said. So the Feast of Weeks is Shavuot. What does Shavuot mean in Hebrew? Weeks. What do you say? Shavua Tov. Parshat HaShavua, the Torah portion of HaShavua, the week. Shavuot, I mean, what a clever name. You know, I mean, they sat around and said, okay, we've got this holiday, got a lot of good stuff. Anniversary getting the Torah, counting the Omer, 7 weeks. I've got an idea. You guys aren't going to believe this. How about this for a holiday? Weeks. I like it. You know, when Dwayne Wade, not Dwayne, when LeBron was here in Miami, I was in Fort Myers, but he was the master of nicknames. I mean, he came up with D. Wade and C. Bosch. Like, unbelievable creativity. Unbelievable.
And UD.
I mean, I don't know how long it took him to sit around and think of, how about this? C. Bosch. I mean, unbelievable creativity. So weeks is sort of a random, you know, what kind of, that's what it's called, weeks? Okay, but that's what my mind is just saying weeks. But all of a sudden, out of nowhere, not in the Torah. By the way, that's also the day that we got the Torah. Don't you think, if that was the day that we got the Torah might have mentioned? Doesn't mention it. Did you see what just happened? So remember what Rambam says. Rambam says, this we're going to count forever because we're counting to something that's got more meaning than what the Torah is telling us. But we're not sure what. But now my mind comes and tells us, well, what do you think they're counting to? Well, I don't know. Well, I'm going to tell you. When they finished the Omer, they got the Torah. And this is why Hasidic Judaism loves the Omer. Because the idea is that every day you're refining your character. And every day has a Kabbalistic different trait that you're supposed to work on. And so they love this kind of stuff. Right? So do the Misnagdim. The Misnagdim loved it too. The non-Hasidic Jews who are Orthodox, you know, the students of the Vilna Gaon and so forth. They say, okay, we love it because we love Musar. And Musar is about refining your character. And we're building up every single day from Pesach to Shavuot. And once we get to total purity, then we can get the Torah. Because the Torah can't be received by a vessel that's not completely pure. So we spend these 50 days refining our souls and getting them pure so that on the 50th day we can get the Torah. Our problem right now, though, is if that's the case and that's so important and we're going to get the Torah, why doesn't the Torah tell us that Shavuot is the anniversary of getting the Torah? It doesn't tell us that, so that's a problem that we need to get to. Ah, very good. Okay, so one reason is, that's exactly right. One reason that there's no holiday necessarily to getting Torah is because the idea is you're supposed to feel that way every day. Every day is supposed to have the essence of receiving Torah. So that's one theory. I have another one, but that's one. And a lot of rabbis talk about that. Ah, okay. So how do you know, question is, for those at home, how do you know what purity is? So I don't. The Zohar takes a stab at it. So, you know this, I mean, we've talked about this a lot. But God tells Abraham, your people are going to be slaves for 400 years. And if you ask most people, or if you watch Charlton Heston, then they tell you that the Jews were slaves for 400 years. But anyone who knows Torah knows, if you calculate the years, they were slaves for 210 years. And so the question is, why did God tell Abraham it was going to be 400 years? It was only 210 years. And the answer of the Zohar is, the Kabbalah, that if you reach the 50th level of impurity, and the way that you get impure is through neglecting of God and worshiping idols. If you get to the 50th level, you cease to be recognizable as a Jew. You're no longer Jewish. And the Jews in the year 210, the Israelites in Egypt, were at level 49. And if they would have stayed any longer, they would have ceased to be recognizable as Jews, and that would have been the end of Judaism right there. So God said, I said 400, but if I don't take them out now, it's over. So he came and take them out. So the idea is, every day of wandering in the wilderness, they reduced that impurity by one. Because every day that they spent just with God, with the cloud hovering over them, reduced them a level. And after 49 days of doing that, they got back to purity. So Kabbalah tells you that there are all these different spheres. And each day, if you focus, I have an app on my phone, counting the Omer. It's a great app. And so at the end of the day, after I finish Mariv in the evening, I go on this app, and you say the blessing, and it tells you that day, and then you click on the bottom that you counted Omer for that day, and it tells you, Shkoyach. It says, well done. And then it tells you, you're the 1,470,000 person who counted the Omer today. Okay. Which is a lot. That means 1 in every 15 million Jews, 1 in every 15 Jews is using this app, which is pretty good. So you count the Omer, but it also tells you underneath what the Kabbalistic sphere of the day is that you're supposed to be working on. And the idea is, if you go through all 49 days and you work on each one of those things, and you focus on each one of those things, then by the 50th day you'll be pure. Now the truth is, there's no such thing as being pure. If we were to get the Torah today, none of us would get it, because we've all been in cemeteries, and none of us have poured the ashes of the red heifer over us, and so all of us are impure, and except for a few Kohanim who haven't been in a cemetery or in a hospital or whatever, none of us would get the Torah. But that's okay, we understand that. We try to get today by Shavuot as pure in our soul as we can. Yeah. Ah, very nice. Shkoch. Very nice. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. You know, for me, the only way to be in tune with the Jewish world and the Jewish calendar is to daven, to be part of the prayers 3 times a day. If you're not doing that, at least for me, I'm not saying for anyone else, but at least for me, it's very hard to be in tune. You don't, because, you know, you don't think about what day it is. You don't think about what the Jewish date is. You don't think about which prayer, you know, there are different prayers that you say on different days. On Mondays and Thursdays, you say a longer tachanun. You know, on Shabbat, you don't say tachanun, which is the prayers of, like the mini Yom Kippur that you do every day. And they're different. There's a different psalm for every day. And so when you're davening, you have to pay very close attention to what the date is on the Jewish calendar. And if it's a holiday, if it's not a holiday, if it's Rosh Chodesh. I mean, who knows when the next Rosh Chodesh is? I mean, you don't know. How would you know that it was Lag BaOmer? Unless you follow me on Instagram, you wouldn't know that Lag BaOmer is coming up. You know, I mean, but you know, when you're in it every day, it's easy to follow and keep track of because it forces you to. And so I always find if I miss a day of praying, which I try not to ever do, but if I do, I sort of feel off kilter a little bit. And that's one of the points of praying, is to keep you in line with the Jewish. So here now, you have to pay very close attention. Because if you miss a day of the Omer, it's like you missed the whole thing. It's a real problem. If you miss a day, then if you miss even one day, then the rest of them you're not supposed to do with the blessing. because it's one continuous mitzvah. And so you lose, you can count the day. Today is the 34th day of the Omer, but you're not supposed to say the blessing if you've missed a day. So we're on 34. I'm 34 for 34. I'm not bragging, but I'm on a roll. 34 days in a row. Not too shabby. All right. But I've got that app now. Okay, so we're running out of time. I want to finish this off. Look what Maimonides says. The Feast of the Weeks is the anniversary of the revelation of Mount Sinai. In order to raise the importance of this day, we count the days that passed since the preceding festival, just as one who expects his most intimate friend on a certain day counts the days and even the hours. This is the reason why we count the days that passed since the offering of the Omer, between the anniversary of our departure from Egypt and the anniversary of the law-giving. Okay, so Maimonides just said the reason that we count is to build up to excitement from the time we left Egypt until the time we get the Torah, which isn't mentioned at all in the Torah, which is ironic. Okay, the latter was, and so forth. As the great revelation took place only on one day, so we keep its anniversary only one day. But if the eating of unleavened bread on Passover were only commanded for one day, we should not have noticed, and its object would not have been manifest. For it frequently happens that we take the same kind of food for 2 or 3 days, but by our continuing for a whole period of 7 days to eat unleavened bread, its object becomes clear and evident, which means it's really easy to know when Passover is. You can't miss it, because you're going to go a whole week without eating bread. How could you miss that? But Shavuot, you could miss it, because it's only one day, and we don't want you to miss it. So we build up to it. And by the building up to it, then you're certain. Now, why is Passover 7 days and Shavuot is only one day? Because that's what the Torah says. The Torah, in what we just read, said for Passover you need to do this for 7 days, and on Shavuot it's one day. Whether you like it or not, that's what the Torah says. So what Maimonides is saying is, well, you need to be careful. Shavuot, you could miss it, because one day and you could not really get the point. So let's build up to it so that by the time we get there, we're really ready to get the Torah. Okay, you could take it or leave it, but that's what he says. Now, how do we know exactly to count for 7 days? It's repeated in Deuteronomy. So I just wanted to share with you a couple of verses in Deuteronomy. They're here on the sheet. You don't have to go searching for it. It'll save a lot of time. And it doesn't matter what page it's on in Plow, because you have it right here. So it says, you shall count off 7 weeks. Now, if we're counting 7 weeks, when the sickle is first put onto the standing grain, then you shall observe the Feast of Weeks, and that's how we know that after those 49 days, we observe the Feast of Weeks, and that's Shavuot. It's right there, clear as day in Deuteronomy. Now, here's the problem. How do we know that from the morrow of Passover, that 50 days later is when the Torah came, if the Torah doesn't explicitly tell us that Shavuot is the day that the Torah came? So the Talmud works it out. In other words, what the Talmud does is it goes back into the Torah and says, well, what happened? And if we count the days, we could figure it out. Now, do you know how, if you study the Talmud, in the first the tractate of Rosh Hashanah, there's a tractate that's just called Rosh Hashanah. And the whole beginning of Rosh Hashanah, the whole first chapter is all about how to set the calendar. And it's extremely confusing. It's really tough to figure out. But the way that they counted is from the first time that someone saw the moon and then ran to the Sanhedrin and said, I saw the new moon. And they had 2 witnesses that saw the moon. That's when they say from the first moment that someone sees that, Rosh Chodesh starts. Sometimes it's really cloudy. Sometimes they're not sure if it was today or tomorrow. And so sometimes we have 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. And that's how it used to be. And so every month they had to decide if they're going to have 2 days of Rosh Chodesh. We always have 2 days of Rosh. But are we going to have 2 days of Rosh Chodesh or 1 day of Rosh Chodesh? However, in the 4th century, the rabbis fixed the calendar. And they said, we're not doing that anymore. This is the calendar. And from that point forward, from the 4th century to today, we have the same Jewish calendar. So I can tell you, you could figure out, you could calculate what the calendar is going to be 100 years from now and 1,000 years from now. we know exactly what it is. Clear so far? Okay. So, last question, and this hopefully will bring it all together. How were the rabbis able to determine that Shavuot was the day that we got the Torah? So before I tell you that, let me just tell you how the months of the Omer work. What month is Passover in? Japanese car? Nisan. Good. Okay. So you have Nisan. It begins on the 15th. It begins on the 15th day. Okay. What's the month that comes after Nisan that we're in now? ER. Okay. ER is 29 days. What's the month that comes after ER? Sivan. Shavuot is always the 6th of Sivan. So if I want to figure out how many days there are between Passover and Shavuot, it's 49. Spoiler alert. Shavuot is 49. But to get that 49, I need to be able to add up three numbers. How many days there are from the second day of Passover in Nisan to the end of Nisan, all of the days of ER, and the first 6 days of Sivan. Right? So the end of Nisan, all of ER, and the beginning of Sivan. Those 3 months, well, all of ER and a part of Nisan and a part of Sivan, all three of those together equal the period of the counting of the Omer. Does that make sense? Okay. So I did the adding here because I'm not so good at numbers, but it works out to, it works out to 49, but let me see if I can find. Okay, so there are 30 days in Nisan. So the 15th, the night of the 15th is the first Seder. The night of the 16th is the second Seder. The men's Seder is like the 12th. It's like 4 days earlier. Right. So you eat whatever the hell you want. Right. The men's Seder, we have French toast. Yeah. So we start counting from the 16th on Nisan to the 30th, which is 14. ER has 29 days in it. So 14 plus 29 is? Any accountants?
43.
Yeah, it would take me a month to figure. 43. Now, 6 days of Sivan, 43 plus 6, 49. That's your 7 weeks. Okay? So that means that the 6th, then the next day after the 49th is the 50th day, the day that we got the Torah. Okay, so big deal. All we know is that we just counted 49 days and it takes us to the 6th of Sivan. We still don't know how. Okay, yes? Don't give it away. No. All right. Did you look at the last source? Oh, because I give it to you there. But okay, you're right. But well, it's 10 o'clock, so I could just leave it on that. But let me just. The Talmud figures it out. The Talmud figures it out that the 6th day of Sivan had to be the day that the Torah was given. Even though the Torah doesn't explicitly say that, there are clues in the book of Exodus, namely chapter 19, that if you work it out, the Torah had to have been given on that day. So look what and I'll show you the proof in a second, but let me just tell you this. What we just said was, the Torah tells us to count from the day after you left Egypt, Mimacharat HaShabbat, probably because it wanted us to give us a full day to, it's not like God said, all right, listen, I've already, we got to get this moving because I already set up a day to give the Torah. He could have picked any day to give the Torah. It's not like he had, listen, we got to do the Torah today because I got something tomorrow. Right? He could have done it. So what the Torah is telling you is we're going to count 50 days until we get to the end of the agricultural period. And I've already given you clues in the Torah to tell you at the end of that agricultural period is going to be the day that the Torah is given. I'm not spelling it out for you. Comes Maimonides and says, you think the only thing about this is that it's agricultural? Maimonides lived 500 years after the Talmud was completed. He knew the Talmud by heart. He wrote a summary of the Talmud, and he said, the Talmud tells us. That's what you think counting of the Omer is? Look what it says. So, in the Tractate of Shabbat, it says this, the sages taught, on the 6th day of the month of Sivan. By the way, how do we know when the Torah was given? Because we already had the book of Exodus where we got the Torah. So all you have to do is go back and say, hey, what day was that? Well, how do you know? So what does it say? On the 6th day of the month of Sivan. The 10 Commandments were given to the Jewish people. That means the whole Torah too. Rabbi Yossi, so there's a debate. Rabbi Yossi says was the 7th day. Okay, fine. We always go with the majority, so that's why it's the 6th. Rava said, everyone agrees that the Jews came to the Sinai desert on the new moon, as it is written here. What does that mean? On the new moon? What are you talking about, the new moon? The new moon means Rosh Chodesh. Okay, so what do we realize? They got to the Sinai region, in and around Mount Sinai, on Rosh Chodesh, on the first day of Sivan. How do we know that? Because it says in the 3rd month. Well, the first month of the year, according to the Torah calendar, first month is Nisan. Second month is Iyar. 3rd month is Sivan. So they got to Mount Sinai on the first day of Sivan. Okay, so all I know so far is Shavuot, the giving of the Torah, we celebrate the giving of the Torah on the 6th day of Sivan. So what do I have so far? I have that they got in and around Mount Sinai on day 1. But then the Talmud goes through and tells you, and if you go in the Torah, you can see this. Moses goes up the mountain and talks to God. That's day 2. Day 3 is he comes down to the Jews and asks them, do you want to accept the Torah? And they say yes. And he says, then you need to take 3 days of preparation. And after 3 days of preparation, separate your men from your women and so forth. After the 3 days, you're going to get the Torah. So we had day 1, they get there. Day 2, Moses goes up. Day 3, comes down. Day 4, 5, and 6, they're preparing themselves. And on the night of day 6 comes the Torah. So the 6th of Sivan is the day they get there and really are getting the Torah. Now, Rabbi Yossi says it's day 7, and you can argue back and forth. Did it come before sundown or after sundown and so forth? That's an argument between the rabbis. Ultimately, they decided, no, it was day 6. But what the Talmud just proved was that, so here's what they then did. Once they realized this, they said, yeah, but what if Iyar in between or Sivan has 2 days of Rosh Chodesh? Then we'll miss it by a day or 2. And for many years, it may have been that because the calendar wasn't fixed, that Jews celebrated Shavuot on the wrong day. But by the 4th century, the rabbis said, we're going to make sure that doesn't happen anymore. So we're going to fix the calendar and say there's a certain amount, a finite day of every month, there's a finite number of Rosh Chodesh days, and that's it. And we're going to make sure that we celebrate Shavuot every year on the right day. Okay? And so what the rabbis just did was they said, you might have thought Shavuot was obsolete because it was just an agricultural holiday. And that's the mistake that the Karaites made. At least according to the rabbis. If you want to be a Karaite, move to Chicago. There's one shul there. Be my guest. But this was the rabbis' problem with the Karaites. Was that if you only go according to the Torah, then you don't have the Talmud's fixed calendar. If you don't have the Talmud's fixed calendar, you're going to end up celebrating Shavuot probably on the wrong day every year. And if you do that, you're going to miss the whole point of why we're counting in the first place. Because if we were counting in the first place only for an agricultural reason, Joseph Caro never would have mentioned it. We wouldn't need it anymore. It would be obsolete. But in fact, what Jews have been doing for the last 2,000 years, correctly on the right day, is refining our character every day from the end of Pesach so that when we do get to Shavuot, we'll be ready to accept it. And this was the genius of the rabbis. The rabbis made an innovation, but they made the innovation in order to protect what was in the Torah, not to change what was in the Torah. So yes, they made an innovation and they said, we're going to fix the calendar. And we're going to say, even though no one's going to come and tell us when the new moon is, this is pretty much when it is. Right? The same way we do today. January has so many days. February has so many days. March has so many days. Okay. But the innovation they made was to say, if we don't make this innovation, we'll have missed the point of what's really going on here. So they made the innovation, they fixed the calendar, in order to allow us Jews to have Shavuot on the right day. Because if we don't have Shavuot on the right day, then we'll stop counting completely. Because we'll say, who needs this? This is one of those obsolete mitzvahs that we don't have to do. There are lots of other mitzvahs we're not allowed to do. You don't do them. Right? But they said, wait a minute. The purpose of this mitzvah was never to be obsolete. The purpose of this mitzvah was to connect Pesach and Shavuot together for all time so that Jews would understand what this point of the year is. And so for this reason, this is a secret of the Torah that the rabbis figured out. Nowhere in the Torah does it say that Shavuot is the giving of the Torah. However, if you go only according to the Torah, and you do your own math, and you figure out what day the Jews got to Mount Sinai and got the Torah, and then you say to yourself, oh my gosh, do you realize that the end of this counting period is the same day that the Jews got to Mount Sinai and got the Torah? And the rabbi said, can you imagine there are people who say, oh yeah, that was a coincidence. Don't worry about that, you don't have to do that anymore. So the rabbis said, no, that's the Torah telling us that this is Man Matan Toratenu. But if we call it that, you'll think that only one day a year do you get the Torah. And the rest of the year you won't hear it. And you can't do that. So we can't call it Zman Matan Toratenu. But you've got to be blind to miss that Shavuot is Zman Matan Toratenu. And that's why we're counting Omer. This is day 34. We're headed to day 50. Okay. Shabbat Shalom.
Have a good weekend. Yeah.